Hello, and welcome back to geometry for second semester. Today you are going to be looking at some circle vocabulary. This will be set up in a way of I will have the word and definition. It will go in the same order as the worksheet you have in front of you. You can feel free to pause, fast forward, rewind throughout this video. I do highly encourage you to listen as I'm writing because I'm going to point out some important notations when it comes to vocabulary. Because with circles, it is super important to have the notation correct when naming these parts of a circle. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and go to our first word. All right, our first word is the definition of a circle. It's a set of points equidistant from a given point, which is going to be your center. Again, pause this if you need to write down, but I'm going to keep talking through it. So you name a circle with the center points. All right, so your center point is always going to be, it'll look like it's in the center, and typically you will be told if something's in the center. How you'll see it named, you'll have a circle with a dot. Oops, my bad. There it goes. Circle with a dot, and then the point that is the center. So that is my circle and dot in the middle with, so that says circle C. Very rarely, but you could actually see it fully written out as the word circle C. Not as common, but it's possible. So that is the definition of a circle, and how you name a circle is with the point and the letter in the center. Our second vocabulary word is just the center. It is that point that is in the middle of your circle, where all points are equidistant. Now, just to clarify, equidistance right here, that means equal distance. So they're all the same distance, is what that means. So the center is just this point C. And you'll just name it with the actual letter itself, point C. The radius is a segment, and a segment has endpoints. Remember, we talked about that at the very beginning of last semester. So the endpoints of this segment are from the center and on the circle. So you're going to go from the center, which is at O, and then you're just going to go to a point that is on the circle. So we're going to go to one of the points. I'm choosing Z right here. You'll want to draw these points on your circle on your paper. So one radius would be, you name it from O to Z. Now because it's a segment, we need to have the segment sign above it, which is just that dash above. So O to Z would be one radius. Another radius could be from O to Y. That is also acceptable. And then a third radius could be from O to X. So you can have multiple radii in a circle. Typically, you just have to be able to identify one of them. So going from the center to the edge is a radius. Now a diameter goes between 2 points. So you're going from one point on the circle to another point on the circle, like on the edge. But the important part here is that you must pass through the center. All right, so our center is at O. If we make a diameter, we must pass through O. So we could go from X all the way across to Y as long as we are passing through O. Now to name this diameter, you just name it with the 2 points that are actually on the circle, X, Y. And again, because it's a segment, we're going to have that dash above it. So from X to Y, the 2 endpoints, but we have to be going through that center of the circle. That's the only diameter we can make for this one right here. because it's a straight segment. A chord is just a segment with endpoints on the circle. So it doesn't matter if it passes through the center of the circle or not. It's just going to start and end on the edges of the circle. So we could go from X to Z. That would be considered a chord. X to Z. Another chord could be from Y to Z. And then a fun little fact written down there for you. Your diameter, which goes from one end of the circle to the other end, is your longest chord. So yes, technically X to Y would also be a chord, even though we just named it as a diameter. So X to Y could be considered a chord as well. But if I'm asking you what X to Y is, I'll want you to say diameter, just to let you know. All right, now this takes a small change, okay? If you've noticed with all of the vocab words that you've listed above, we have said a segment, a segment, a segment. All of them are segments. This is different. A secant is a line. Now, if I was talking to y'all in person, I would ask you what's on the end of a line. Hopefully you would respond back and tell me that at the end of a line are arrows. All right, super, super important, okay, that you have arrows at the end of your line. So a secant is a line with arrows that intersects the circle in exactly two places. So we're going to have a line cutting through the circle, and it's going to intersect the circle at two different places. So if we use these points that are already on my picture here, I'm going to draw a line through Y and through Z, just like this. Again, my secant is a line that's going to have arrows at the top and the bottom of this. And how I name this secant, I name it with those 2 points. Any 2 points on that purple line would suffice. So we're going to go YZ. Now, because it's a line, I need to have that line symbol directly above those letters. So I need to have that dash and make sure you have those arrows. This is what I mean with notation is super, super, super important, okay? Because look at that nice little note that I have given you. It says a chord and a secant can be named using the same letters. The notation, which is the drawing above your letters, tells you whether it is a secant or a chord. Remember, a secant is a line. That's exactly what we just listed, the Y, Z with a line above it. But if I was talking about the chord from Y to Z, which means I only want to stay inside my circle, I'm not going outside the circle, just Y to Z with a chord, I would just draw the dash above because it's a segment. Out of everything that you have written down so far, I would 100% highlight, star, do something with this note here because it's super important. I will tell you, chord and secant are some of the top ones that get confused, and it is all because of that notation with the arrows or without the arrows. So please, please highlight, star, do something to bring that to your attention. So a tangent, it's again, this one is also a line, but the difference is it only intersects at one place, which means you can kind of think of it as it's skimming right along the side of the circle. So I'm going to draw it by point X. This right here would be considered a tangent line. It goes up and down. It is only touching the circle at point X. I know it looks like it's touching at other places, but it's only going to be touching at point X. So how you would name it, you would use 2 points on the line. I'm going to add a point since we don't have a point out here and call that A. So this would be AX, again with our line symbol above it. So a tangent touches in one place, a secant touches in 2 places. Point of tangency is just the point where a tangent line intersects the circle. So if we were to draw that same tangent line right here, then our point of tangency, there's just point X. That's all it would be, just the point that's touching the circle. You can have multiple tangent lines, like I could have a tangent at Y right here, where Y would be the point of tangency. Excuse my very messy lines. And so at that consideration, Y would be your point of tangency. Now these next 4 vocabulary words are our last vocabulary words, I believe. 3 vocabulary words? 3 or 4. And they are super important because this is a new notation, a new symbol. We have never seen this before. So this is called an arc. An arc is a portion of the edge of the circle, and it's going to be defined by 2 endpoints. If you've been in my class, you know I relate things a lot to food. An arc is like the crust of a pizza. It is a portion of the outside. So if you have your one piece of pizza and you're looking at the crust would be considered an arc. So if you're these are always going to be measured by degrees, 20 degrees, 90 degrees, 45 degrees, whatever it may be. And it has this really cool fancy symbol. It's like a little rainbow or U shape on top. All right, that means arc. So if we were to name an arc, so we're just going to pick 2 points, 2 endpoints on the edge of this circle. We're going from Y to Z. We would use those 2 letters. But instead of doing the dash or the line above, like we do for segment and line, we're going to do the arc symbol above it. So that's how you would name an arc. The arc symbol with YZ directly below it. Now there's 2 specific types, kind of 3 specific types of arcs. Our first one is called a minor arc. A minor arc is an arc that is less than 180 degrees, right? Or you can think of it as less than half the circle. Because less than 180 degrees is exactly half of a circle. So we are less than half of the circle. So if you're thinking about the crust, right, you're less than half. You only use 2 letters to name this with. So if I go from X to Z, this is considered half, less than half of the circle. And so this could be XZ, that arc. Now what we used in the example prior, YZ, could also be a minor arc because it is less than half of the circle. It must be less than. On the flip side of this, a major arc is an arc that is greater than 180 degrees. So it is more than half the circle. Super, super important. Minor arc is named with how many? 2 letters. A major arc is always, always, always labeled with 3 letters. So we have to be more than half the circle, and we have to use 3 letters. So how do we do that? Let's look at an example. Let's say we are going to go like this around the circle. I'm going to make it drastic. This green portion of the edge of my circle is over halfway of my circle. So how you name this with 3 letters, you use your starting letter, Y. You use your end point, your start and your end, Z. And then you use any letter in between them along that path. So along this path, I pass by X, and so X is going to go in the middle. So this would be arc Y, X, Z, and then I would put a nice arc over it. So that is more than half of the circle. It's over 180 degrees. And our last vocabulary word is a semicircle. A semicircle is a special type of arc. This arc is exactly 180 degrees, or exactly half of the circle. All right, the end points are going to be on your diameter. And you also need to use 3 letters to name it. So to kind of help you visualize this, I'm going to draw in that diameter from the very beginning. We had a diameter from X to Y. So to have a semicircle, I need to go from X to Y. I'm going to go this way. I'm starting at X, I'm ending at Y. Those are the 2 points in my diameter. Again, we're going to use 3 letters to name it. So we're starting at X, ending at Y, and this time Z is in the middle. And so that would be our semicircle. So that is all of our vocabulary terms. Feel free to go back and review any of them. Pause this, rewind, do what you need to do. If you notice, attached to your vocabulary terms, there is also a little bit of practice in naming and identifying these. I'm going to go through this example with you, and then you're going to do the next one on your own and check your answers. So let's talk through this. Using this diagram to the right, give an example of each of the following. And then, super important, be sure to use proper notation. So make sure you put the arc symbol, the line symbol, or the segment symbol. So the center of our circle is going to be right there at point A. So you can just list A. That is perfectly acceptable. If you want to say the word point A, also fine. All right, next on the list, it says a chord other than the diameter. So remember, if you need to look back in your notes, a chord goes from one edge of the circle to the other. So just from one point to the other. So I am going to use E to D. E to D is certainly going to be a chord. Now when I write a chord, E to D, make sure you put the segment symbol above it, because a chord is a segment. The next one says a diameter. Remember, our diameter, it's like a chord, but it has to pass through the center. So we have to pass through that point A. So we're going to go from E to C. That's our only diameter in this circle. E to C. Again, with proper notation, putting that segment above it. Now, radius we have a few options. A radius just goes from the center to the edge of the circle. So we have our center point A. So we could go from A to E. That's acceptable. Again, with our symbol. We could go from A to C. Or we could go from A to B. All three of those are considered a radius, so any of those would be acceptable. Now down here, tangent. Remember, a tangent is a line, which means we need to have arrows. A tangent touches a circle at one point. So I'm looking at these lines and seeing which ones touch at one point. I see that this line right here, line B to F, touches at one point. I'm going to put my line symbol above it. Also, this one over here, we're going to say C to G for that. C to G touches at one point. So those would both be considered tangents. Now their point of tangency is just where they touch. So we would have point B and we would have point C. Our last one for this example is a secant. All right, trying to find a secant. Remember, a secant is also a line, and it cuts through the circle twice. So this right here, E to D, which we did use earlier for a chord, but this time we're going to use it as a secant because we're going to include those arrows. E to D with arrows would be considered a secant, while E to D with no arrows is our chord. So the very last thing, I want you to try to identify these 7 in your skills practice. What I want you to do is I want you to pause this video, try to identify, just give one example. You don't have to give all examples, just give one example, and then unpause this and check your work, okay? Hopefully you paused, and now you can see these answers to check. If you have any questions on these, please stop your teacher and ask any questions. All right, now you can go and do a quick little checkup using quizzes, and you are completed. Welcome back. Looking forward to a great semester.